And I'm not sure. I mean, this is, we've had 3 plenary meetings and this is a breakout. Would anybody like us to start with introductions or can we dive in? Okay, I guess I'll get started. I think everybody knows each other at this point. And Ethan Robertson and Rebecca Wallach are in their cars, and and there's the commissioner now. And I think Rebecca may be off camera for the meeting. Ethan may be joining once he gets to his desk. And Tom, have you started the recording?
Yes, I have.
Yes, you have. Okay, great. Amanda, we were just sort of getting underway. Do you want to kick things off, or shall I?
Well, I will turn it quickly over to you, Craig, if you want to facilitate the conversation. But just wanted to say thank you all for being here. I know spending 2 hours talking about the tier program doesn't sound like a lot of fun to some people, but I'm sure we'll have a great conversation. And in fact, I'm not sure it will take a full 2 hours. I think we have enough time between now and when we reconvene as a full group in October to have another meeting if we need it. So if we get to a point where we feel like we need more information that we don't have in the room and need to go away and get it and come back and finalize our thoughts, in terms of what we'd like to recommend back to the full the full task force to consider from a process standpoint. I think we've got some flexibility there. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Craig.
Right, thanks. And there was an echo on your line. I don't know if you've got multiple mics on, and maybe I was the only one hearing that.
No, I just have horrible technology luck right now, I think. So I'm going to mute.
Okay. So we discussed before you hopped on, Amanda, that maybe we don't need introductions because everybody seemed to know each other. So I guess what I will do is focus us on the charge, and this language actually comes directly from the resolve creating the task force, which is that we are to explore recommendations to preserve and enhance the effectiveness of the current dairy stabilization program, also known as the TIER program. So recommendations to preserve and enhance the effectiveness. And I guess I will start with the stipulation that the idea that has already been surfaced to preserve and enhance it is to fund it at the level so that it actually meets the cost of production. So if there aren't any objections, I think we will include that as a stipulation that is one recommendation of the group. And so then I guess I'll pause and see if there are any objections that we include that. Seeing none, then I guess then the next question is to, in essence, open the floor. What ideas are out there? We could think about what is working well about the TIER program now, and are there ways to improve it? What are their thoughts about how it could be enhanced and preserved?
And just from a point of process, I mean, we don't have a large number of people here. I mean, certainly we want to hear from the task force members. We did envision having some time for public comment, but I don't know how folks feel. Do you want to just allow the public folks who are here to weigh in on some of these questions, or should we keep the format to the sort of standard way that we do this, where we'll have the discussion amongst the task force members and then we'll open it up for other thoughts?
I'm fine with letting everybody, join in, but I think we need to keep in mind that maybe next time there might be 20 people on here. So maybe we just want to keep it within the task force and then open it up for a
Yep.
discussion.
Okay, we can do that. Just wanted to float that out there.
So I would just add to what Craig said. Obviously, if we were fully funded to the short run break even point, the tier program would be more effective. But I think it's important to point out that we still have this very important floor that every dairy farmer knows that is there, so that every month we know what the floor, the worst case scenario could be. And so I think we're above and beyond what a lot of farmers in other states have. So that's a positive. So it's obviously this program is working. We just could enhance it by having it fully funded.
And I'll capture notes as we go.
But I'm taking notes
Okay.
if you'd rather not.
I'll probably take some anyway, and we'll just
Okay.
combine them in the end.
Are there, I know, yeah, Julie Marie, go ahead.
Thanks. I don't know if we want to get into, there's two questions that come out for me under this funding category. One is, making a recommendation as to what is the preferred level, which, we just had a little conversation about that. And Heath is right. The predictability factor needs to be highlighted as one of the assets of the program, that the farmers can count on at least whatever safety net is set, and that allows them the ability to plan and the lenders appreciate that, because then they can predict. But do we want to comment at all on how we're going to fund it, or do we want to just hit that one back to the legislature and see what they come up with?
I think it would be a good idea to offer up a couple suggestions. So at the bare minimum, maybe it gets them thinking about other ideas instead of just leaving it very open-ended.
I would agree with that also.
And currently, is everybody familiar with what the funding mechanism is currently? It is, it comes out of the gambling cascade.
Sure.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, we get 1/2 of 1% of the slots revenue from the Oxford Casino, and that money comes in every month, and it goes to the tier account as a dedicated account, and that money has to be drawn down first in making any payments. And then, according to the statute, if the program requires additional funds to meet the payments, then as administrator, we send a draft over a request to the controller's office, and the controller, according to statute, must transfer the required amount back to the tier account in order to pay that out. So it's that little bit of gambling money that we get first, and then it's general fund. And we're, there is another piece of milk money that goes on over here, and that is being mindful that there is handling fee that is on every gallon of milk that moves through the state. That isn't tied to the tier program. That goes directly in the general fund. That does not make its way. There is no link between that fee and what the tier program pays out.
I
You
think
know-
one of the really unique factors of this program is that it is that language that it has to be paid, whatever the remaining need is. If we were to shift the funding mechanism, would the statute have to be opened, and could that language change?
If you're just looking at funding, that's a budgetary process. And so that really doesn't open up the tier language statute. If you're going to adjust how the money is going out, then that opens up the tier statute. And so at that point, once it's open, anything, it could happen. But and Amanda, you may have a different take on it, but really it's mostly the funding boils down to at the budget level. Because it is its own funky line in the budget. Granted, it's a best guess line, but they need, and we have a balanced budget requirement, so there has to be something in there. And right now it is primarily a draw off the general fund. So that's how.
What's, Julie Marie, you probably provided us with this information on a handout you've given us already, but the handling fee, what is, in terms of comparatively, how much does that tend to put into the general fund versus how much does the general fund end up covering tier payments?
The handling fee is bringing in about $65,000 a month on average.
Okay.
Keep in mind that it is tied to class 1. And again, class 1 is a very sensitive category, both from a pricing standpoint and from a consumption standpoint. So, that's the way it's set up. There was a group back in the 2010, 13, somewhere in that window that did look at, possibly expanding the handling fee as a source of revenue to other dairy products. And the major reason why that was not pursued is just the complexity of it, and the difficulty of collection and enforcement at the retail and wholesale levels, and the fact that the processing that takes place in state is primarily class 1, so that any expansion of it would be on products that are mostly coming from outside the state, and so a concern about how that would impact consumer trends and markets in the state.
I think I heard in Annie's comment some caution of, should we be cautious about making recommendations that could potentially open the statute? It was not an expectation to join the task force that anybody was an expert in how the Maine state budget works, which, so I don't know, in terms of thinking about ideas, it was suggested that it would be good perhaps to have another, have a couple of thoughts about where funding might come from. And that may require understanding the various income streams that the state, leverages. But so I don't know if anybody wants to go down that road. And Rebecca, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you did say maybe it would be a good idea to have some ideas, and I don't know if that meant you had one yourself.
Well, at the last task force meeting, did somebody bring up another casino that could possibly help fund? I guess I don't understand, where all the revenue goes from these various, streams. So just an idea.
There are Maine has a number of gambling avenues. We've got a lottery, we've got 2 physical casinos, we have off-track betting facilities, and we have now sports betting and online gaming. So those are all, if you will, that falls under the gambling heading. Each of those the revenue is distributed uniquely, based on, quite honestly, some of the political sensitivities of the time of its passage in the legislature. That's how the tier ended up getting the percentage from Oxford, is that dairy was front and center in the public's eye. At the same time, Oxford was looking to push a referendum through to build that facility. The tricky part is the payments that are made from all of those are referenced as the cascade. And that cascade, literally there's lots and lots of people who receive money from that. And I'm sure nobody is going to want to lose the money that they're getting from that. So that is something to be mindful of if we're pursuing that. But those, especially some of the newer avenues of gambling, have been shown to be very lucrative to the state. And there've been a lot of articles about that recently, about how much it's bringing into state coffers in general, not necessarily specific to any program.
Perhaps the online sports betting would be an idea.
Can I, so I'm home now, so I feel like I can talk. I think Craig sort of touched on this. A couple of people have touched on this. I think it's worth us mentioning that maybe there's a couple of other places that the money could come from, but I think we would be better off trying to suggest ideas on how to make the program a little bit better.
All right, well, we can come back to Ethan when he rejoins. But the way people are approaching this question and the sensitivity does sort of segue into a question that I was having for the group, which is, in addition to, are there ideas about how to build and safeguard ongoing support for the program, because that will be required to continue it, to expand it? Are there ideas about who needs to be engaged and how?
I think having the economic impact, some sort of economic impact study, would be incredibly helpful in how we talk about the impact our dairies have, because we can talk about the actual impact we have till we're blue in the face, but until there are some people in the legislature especially until they see the impact and see this program as economic development, they think it's just a handout that's just coming into our pockets, which couldn't be further from the truth, because every penny of it goes right back out, is the reality. And so I know we initially talked about some sort of study early on, and I think in our first meeting, and I think it makes sense for us to kind of talk about this here in addition to in the larger group, because I think it all ties into engaging, the legislative allies, as well as people who don't really understand what the tier program is, because it is a complicated program, just like milk pricing is complicated. But I think it's imperative that we really try to, hammer it home that this is economic development, and that this is not just coming into dairy farmers' pockets, it's going out into our rural communities, and it's rural development as much as anything.
And the economic impact study would be a critical tool to make that case. Any other pieces that people would want that people think need to, people need to see, and I've heard legislators mentioned as a constituency, obviously, that needs to be engaged. Are there other constituencies?
I would say the consumers are probably part of that group that we need to engage, because they're the ones that, that we're making these food products for, that in the end, if we don't step up and do something now, fast forward 20, 30 years, what does food security look like in the state of Maine? That would come out during the impact study, though. How would we go about doing something like that? I mean, is that a year-long process that would, or is there something that we could get done? Oh, it's September now, so no, we can't get it done by January. So
I'll try talking, not being muted. I do think in terms of if it was something we did through our department, through the state process, first would have to have funding to do it. And then we'd probably either need to put out an RFP or go through some other process to identify somebody that could actually conduct the study. And of course, then they would need the time to do it. So it would take a little bit of time. Not forever, but it would take a little bit of time.
And Ethan put in the chat, he thinks it would be more than a year-long project. Ethan, we lost you in the middle of your last comment. I don't know if you want to use the chat to try to finish your thought, or if your audio has come back.
Or maybe try turning your camera off to save some bandwidth.
Okay, so here are the ideas. Because I think the thought was we try to surface the ideas, get public comment, and then dig in and maybe prioritize those ideas and make some decisions about whether this subgroup needs to meet again or what the next steps are. So we got fully funding the program to the short run break-even point. Some comments were made about what is working, what is working well about it. but I'm not sure that, we probably want to memorialize those somewhere, but not in terms of next steps. Maybe that's not what we need to focus on. So fully funding the short run break even, looking at, therefore, looking at additional funding streams possibly, and conducting an economic impact study to be able to better make the argument. And I heard tier program is economic development. I also heard tier program is food security strategy. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I've got too many windows open, so I didn't see your raised hand. So anyway, so those are the ideas that I'm hearing. Please tell me what I missed.
I think you captured what we've talked about so far, but I'd like to maybe throw out another aspect of it, is because we've been talking about communicating or educating legislators and consumers about the tier program, not necessarily how it works, but how it benefits all the people of Maine. As part of that education campaign, we need to be clear about a couple of things, and these are the things that tend to muddy the waters the most in the legislative discussions, and that is how we talk about, is our goal the number of farms, or is our goal the amount of food we're producing? And it can be both, but how do we do that and explain it without one side of that equation cannibalizing the other?
Well, except, I mean, I would argue that there is a tipping point where if we lose enough farms, it becomes really hard for the rest of our farmers to operate. And so I think number of farms is important.
But you're right on the face of it. What worries me from the inside is if we were to lose, for example, a couple of our farms in Clinton, the ripple effect, it may only be a couple of farms, but the ripple effect could be much greater, because the volume of milk is supporting not just agribusinesses and agri-services, but it's supporting the trucking runs and things of where that milk is going. And so that has always been my concern, that we find some way to balance the two sides of it, both the amount of milk and the number of farms, because they both play an important role in basically in the ag infrastructure, which is, ultimately where the biggest losses, the biggest impacts from those losses will be felt.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree. I think both. It's both. We have to figure out how to talk about the importance of both. It's not an either or.
And
I agree.
Go ahead, Ethan. Sorry. I mean, Heath.
I agree with that also. And, I think a lot of times, especially legislators, don't understand that, we're losing farms, and we're going to lose some farms. There's farmers that get older, they have nobody to take the farm over. We can't expect them, a lot of times as farmers say, oh, so-and-so, they got done farming. Well, they're 80 years old and there's nobody to take it over. They should be able to retire. So it's not always, you could make the argument that if that farm was profitable, then somebody would want to take it over at the same time. But it's not always that farm's not profitable, and it's sometimes that they're just retiring, and then some folks don't want to do that work anymore. So, but we want to make sure that message gets out there, that it's not all about that, because I think legislators sometimes say, well, the program's not working because we're still losing farms, but I just want to really hammer home that the program does work. We just need to fund it at the level that the study shows that we need.
Can I ask, I guess, the piece about the effectiveness of the program, especially from the farmers who utilize it, I'm narrowing in on a few people here, but from a functional standpoint, is there anything about it, you know, administratively? I mean, I know Julie Marie is like, every time there's been relief funding, she has ready to go as soon as the statutory, you know, deadline passes so that she can get checks out, and she's always raring and ready to go. But are there any technical aspects of the program that you wish worked a little bit better or a little bit differently?
No, I mean, Julie and I have conversations every month because it doesn't matter if like, we're always going to be looking for that as quickly as possible. I mean, we always get it by the end of the month. And we've got it so that all of our markets, whether it be a co-op or a processor, they're all getting it within the month they should. So everybody will be getting their check at the end of this month for July milk. But we're always looking for that to like get to us as soon as possible. You know, the only thing, you know, if we could get it the day it was there, I mean, in an ideal world, Julie would get it all done and boom, it would be gone. And so, I mean, until that happens, we're always going to be like, can we get it yesterday? But it's always there. We always getting August for July milk or September for August milk. So it's always there, but it's that it could always be that day earlier.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I mean, there are some inherent pieces built into state government as protections of public money that slow down the process of getting it out, and moving it through. And, you know, for example, the $3 million, the dairy relief, it needed to pass 2 separate approval levels. Even though we filed everything, had everything in the system on the day that it became legally available, it has to go through the approval process, and that is slow and deliberate because we're dealing with large amounts of money. And, you know, I know it's very frustrating for farmers, and maybe there's more that we need to do to educate about the expectation, because it's I know it's hard when you get in your head that the money should be here. It should have been out on the 9th, but that's only when the money was authorized to exist. Anyway, Annie and Heath and I have had these conversations ad nauseum.
And, you know, I mean, and I know Julie's working on this also, but like sometimes it'll go out at different times. So one producer will get it, and then it'll be as much as 4 or 5 days, and another co-ops producers might get it, or independent producers might get it. And really, and if we didn't call each other and ask if you got your check yet, nobody would know, but that's what we do. So, and some of the ones that get it earlier like to call you because they know you don't have it yet. So,
and so everybody knows. So we've implemented a little experiment this month with the tier check, in that the 4 major co-ops, which are the ones that usually have checks that require this double authorization system. So that's what slows them down in going out. We have, rather than saying they have to be out before a certain day, which is how it's written in the statute, I've requested that they go out on a certain day, which is actually going to be the day before the statutory deadline, to see if that helps get it all out at the same time so that there isn't the stagger effect. Because the service center doesn't know that Oakhurst farmers are going to talk to DFA farmers, and, you know, they're just kind of going through their list and doing the sign off and moving it through the system. So we'll try this month, but it means that checks won't be cut until Monday. As opposed to, it's possible that some of the checks could have gone out this week, but then you might have had some that wouldn't go out till Monday anyway, which just seems to add a lot of stress. So there's an experiment this month to try to see if reducing the stress offsets the need to have it out ASAP.
it also shows you how necessary this program is. That there's a certain time of month where like Heath gets calls, I get calls, Julie Marie gets calls. It's like, what's the tier number? What's going on with it? When's it coming? Like this is a necessary part of all of our cash flow. And it's becoming more and more, like the calls are becoming more and more desperate at times. Doesn't exactly make us feel very good.
Yeah, I've actually had 2 text messages since we've been on here looking, when is the one-time money coming?
Yeah.
Before we go to public comment, Ethan, how's your tech working? Are you able to weigh in, and is there anything you want to say? Okay, I saw you unmute and then remute. That didn't work.
I think you were not muted and then you muted yourself, Ethan. There you go. Still can't hear you though.
Maybe while Ethan works on his tech, I just got an email from Bill Eldridge, who had intended to be at this meeting, but is tied up somewhere else. And he wanted to make 2 points. Needed funding for the tier, which we've already talked about. And he is suggesting adding a 25-cent surcharge or tax to tobacco and adding a 10% surcharge to adult use. I'm assuming he's referencing marijuana. Anyway, I'll try to forward this out to everybody.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Sorry. I've been able to hear you guys the whole time. So thank you for trying to get me in the mix. I didn't have anything particular to finish on that thought. I don't think. I worry a little bit about trying to tag it on to other things like tobacco or marijuana or gambling, in that sometimes those taxes and stuff, the reason people are interested in putting those taxes on is because they're hoping that people are going to reduce their use. So if it works right, then that income stream goes away. Right. I worry about that a little bit.
Okay, so let's open it up to public comment. And I see at least 3 members of the public: Bradley Russell, Jenny Tilton Flood, and Julianne Smith online. Did anybody want to add either to what we've been talking about, which is ideas for strengthening, preserving and enhancing the effectiveness of the tier system, the tier program, or anything else?
I think Jenny's got her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jenny.
Hi, thank you. So I'll do it in like a reverse order. Because Commissioner Beal asked a really great question about the technical delivery of the program and how it affects farmers. And while I understand that it is a minority of farmers that deal with this issue, but some of us do not know exactly what we're going to get. Some of us don't. It is a lot of math to do. And maybe I'm just not good at math, but I don't know that all my milk is going to be covered under one particular tier number. I don't know that what percentage of my milk will be covered. And it moves through. And I know that some people can do that math in their head. But I also know that Julie Marie has a lot of spreadsheets to handle that, right? So if there was a way for us, because the whole point is for us to be able to have that minimum baseline idea of what we're getting for our milk and be able to budget and to look forward. I don't get to say that I get paid X dollars for my milk or guaranteed that. I am only guaranteed that for a certain number of weeks throughout a certain month of the year. And then, so if there was if it was just a spreadsheet or a formula, that I had access to that someone could help me with, that would be extremely helpful. And I can't speak for any other farm that may have to do that. Again, they may be really good at it and be able to figure it out in their head, but it is always a surprise to us when we get that check. It is a grateful surprise. There's usually a screenshot and a note to the group management text that says, I'm not crying, you're crying, and that's a true story. And it's always helpful when that check shows up before payroll. So that's a request I would make. And I'm usually the person making spreadsheets for my co-op and my peers, but I can't make one for this one. So any help in that matter would be great. With regards to the program funding, I know it's very attractive and seductive for people to look for other sources of taxation and fees, but I think that's difficult, especially when that creates problems in relationships we may have with the people we depend upon to sell our product, to put it on their store shelves, or to process it or bottle it. And in reality, the people producing the product that's getting or providing the bulk of the revenue in that purpose and that fee structure are the ones funding it. And it comes back to reflect upon what they're able to achieve for pricing. And I think this goes back to a comment I made earlier in this task force process, which was that if we looked at this as an investment in our food system and looked at it as a lens that way, we might be able to secure an idea and forward that education and onboarding for legislators and consumers and farmers and stakeholders that this is indeed an investment in national security and state security in our economy and community. And instead of focusing on taxing something else, which is completely dependent, as Ethan pointed out, to whether or not someone is availing themselves of that service or product, but is treated as a true investment in something that has true economic returns. And I think that might be a better way of securing that funding. I know that that sounds better than it is applicable, and I get that, but it's just, I think it's worth saying. And I also think with regards to the metrics of the program, you all talked about it and circled around it and touched on it, but whether or not the number of farms decreases is not an accurate metric of whether or not the program is working. It's whether or not people have the choice to continue being farms and the choice to enter the actual practice of dairy farming in the state of Maine. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we need to shift thinking, and that's something we all have to do. And I think it's really hard for us to be unemotional about it, and I don't think we ever should be unemotional about it. And Heath had mentioned something about the 80-year-old. I mean, when the Howard brothers decided to no longer milk cows so they could better care for their mom who was in her 90s, we all thought of it as a loss and that they were forced out. Yes, they felt forced out because they really thought they could continue milking cows for the rest of their lives, but it's okay. We have to celebrate their decision to do something else. And I think that that speaks to something that goes beyond what we can solve in a task force.
Okay, thanks.
Because, you know, it's not just money, it's not just milk price, it's the idea that we do age and that we do move on. And dairy farmers like to age in place, right in that tractor cab or right in that barn. And it is something we're going to have to figure out how best to accommodate. But we have to make sure we find ways in. And so I get fearful of that metric being used, and I hear it all the time. I hear it when it's not just our tier program, it's any program, it's checkoff, it's supply management. Everyone wants to use that metric. It's a false metric. If we have twice the number of dairy farms but less milk because of it's not getting where it needs to go, then that's a problem. And so we need to make sure we focus on what we need, and that's a healthy food system and value chain. And also the funding that is based on the gallon. I think that there has to be more look into just that burden and how most of the discussion in the task force's meetings have been about how the focus should be on investing in other types of production So therein lies the question. And I'm sure there's at least one person on this call that wants to know, why is it that the burden is falling on one particular product when everyone's looking at putting different products on the shelf and investing in that? And the final thing I will mention is that I think that there's stuff that farmers can do, the dairy farmers who are benefiting from this, and that is upping the level of participation, the rigor, and the actual level of the cost of production study. And right now it's been done very well, but the highest level of participation in receiving funds has the lowest percentage of participation in the cost of production study. The cost of production study involves a lot of inaccuracies and inequities with regards to level of reporting due to the wide diversity that is so celebrated and so important to our dairy farms throughout the state. But there needs to be some sort of way to level up and make sure that everybody has the benefit of providing that economic and business information. And this is, again, something that has been spoken of and discussed in the Dairy Task Force meetings, and how we raise that level of understanding of business, the ability to participate and provide a balance sheet or receipts or an understanding of how these things are affected. And I think that's also really important when you want to make sure that the people who are spending money and investing in this program, they want to make sure that those numbers are correct. They want to make sure that those numbers are true. And it'd be easy to say it's the least dairy farmers could do, but I know firsthand that it is not the least. It's a lot of work, but I think that at the very least, we should be doing our very best when it comes to that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public comment? Okay.
I just had a follow-up to Jenny's comments, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I don't think it would be that hard, and I don't even know if it has to come from Julie, but to come up with some sort of just explain to everybody. You could make it, it would be the statistical blend price plus the class one, plus your class one, and then you would have to figure, which is hard because it starts in June. So but I think we could make that algorithm for somebody to be able to figure out on their own fairly easy, because Jenny's right. I don't, there's a handful of people that figure that on their own. So, I mean, we're always, I say there's a couple of us that are always looking for the statistical blend so we can do that, but not everybody's doing that. The other thing I just had a question for Jenny. Would you tie the tier to the cost to participating in the cost production?
It sounds like a simple question, and I don't think it would be a fair thing to do. I think, because I know not everybody can. That's the thing. I understand that it's not easy to participate in the cost of production. It has nothing to do with the size of your operation either. But I do think that, yeah, to a certain extent, there should be some sort of expectation that you are willing to participate in this. And it's not unknown of or unheard of. There's many programs that require, if you're going to participate, if you want this opportunity, then you must take a course that provides you an educational basis. And I can't think of the name of the program, but I know I was on a farm credit program and learning program, and a lot of the people who were there because it was a requirement for them to access funding. So I think that I don't know that I would say that they would have to be tied to it and be a requirement, but there should be an expectation of willingness, or at least an expectation to do the process to make sure you are prepared, receive the education and empowerment to be able to participate should you be asked. Because it's the very least. I mean, I wish I could say yes, but I know too many producers where the ask is really, it's a lot. It's an awful lot for some people. It's a lot for all of us. You know, so that's the thing. I mean, if we were able to invest and put the time, effort, and compel producers to all be equipped with the ability to participate, after that point, I would say yes. But right now, I don't think it would be fair to producers to make that requirement. However, this should be a path towards it. I'm sorry.
Oh, exactly. I feel exactly the same way. I wish we could, but I would hate to do that to producers at the same time. I mean, with FSA, we have to like report our crops, go in yearly, and if you don't report your crops, you don't participate in FSA programs.
So my mind is going in two directions. One is there some way we can make it easier to get the data that we need? Is there any way that we can, I mean,
I think I was just real quick on that. I was listening to you guys and thinking, you know, the most basic level of information that a bank usually asks for is like a tax return, right? If you don't have good records, then okay, show me your tax return because somebody must have worked hard to try and get that somewhat right. And to be flip about it, but like you could sort of ask for that, but of course, if you have a good accountant, the point of the tax return is to pay a small amount of taxes, not to show somebody what your real cost of production is, right? So it's a little bit different than that, but that's what I was thinking. I mean, what if they made you know, there's $1,000 payment to work with a professional to try and get your real net cost of production at the end of the year, and maybe you just pay your accountant to fill out a form that we generate. That's like, here's the information we need. Get you, you know, either you, if you're great at doing it, do it yourself. If you're not, then ask your accountant to do it. And a lot of it can come off your tax return, sort of, and then there needs to be a few adjustments. Like, I'm sure we could come up with something and try and entice people to do it.
so that was, so I said my head was going in two directions, and that was one. Yeah. Is there some way that we can make it easier? Or I mean, that's a good point. You know, when people are doing their taxes, for a lot of farmers, that's the one time a year they sit down and reconcile everything, right? And so to have to pick back up some other time of the year and figure out where they are, that could be difficult. But if there was a way to make it simple to transfer some data during that process, that might be a piece of it. But the other piece of it, and I know we're the big lift here that we're talking about is like, we need to get the tier program fully funded. But is there, in a perfect world, could there be some additional, you know, bonus payment to those who provide, you know, the data that is needed, just as an incentive to do that extra work? Because that extra work is not part of the the extra work it takes to report the data is probably not baked into the cost of production study, right? But that is extra work for farmers. So I recognize that.
One real quick thought that I was just thinking about, like, if you just think about it quick, it's like, why wouldn't we just make people give us the information so that we could be confident that it's correct and whatnot? But the other weird thing about that is there would certainly be people that would be prevented for understandable reasons, you know, and when people really need the tier money and really want the tier money, they really, really need it. The way the program is designed, it pays when prices are low, and to hold that over somebody's head, it's not like we're saying, hey, the state of Maine is going to give you 25 cents a hundredweight all year as long as you do this one thing, you know, and you don't get it and it's a good year and it doesn't matter. It's when they need the tier money, they need the tier money.
We had some conversations about potentially having some sort of like rolling cost of production. So there's maybe a group, we run into issues with anonymity, which can be challenging because all of these farms are anonymous. We're not supposed to know who they are. I mean, obviously that's getting more and more challenging as we're losing fewer farms. We're having fewer farms in each tier. But especially for like tier 1 and tier 2, tier 1, which is the most challenging to get the data from, having some sort of program that is like a rolling cost of production that helps folks basically walks them through it almost, you know, quarterly, so that we kind of always have a sense of what the cost of production is on those farms, to not only help set them up to understand their own cost of production, their own books, but also so that we always kind of have this data to pull from. I think, in my opinion, like that's a way we're educating, we're helping to educate these farmers who aren't used to that kind of work, but also it's data that they understand that we can then use to help use to further cost of production study. But the other piece that I think is really important, and the reason Gary Anderson has been so good about doing this for so many years, because farmers feel comfortable with him and they know him, is that working on your financials and your books can be incredibly daunting and incredibly stressful. And looking at it for so many farmers, if you're in the hole and if things are not looking good, which that's the case for many of us, it's awful. And so I think it's a mixed bag, and it's not that farmers aren't necessarily equipped, it's that they want to just, lots of times want to just bury their heads in the sand. And so having somebody call you out and saying, why aren't you doing this? This is for the betterment of everybody, and this is to make things better for you. It still doesn't matter. It's just emotionally exhausting. And so I think it's a fine line. We have to recognize that plays a part of it.
Jenny, go ahead.
So that plus Annie's very important comments there, plus what Julie Marie mentioned in the chat, bring up really great points, because I am personally very concerned. While I am very happy for Gary Anderson to enjoy retirement, I am very, very concerned that he will not be there to go through the not proverbial, but literal shoeboxes of receipts and help discern different, because on many of the farms that he has to be most hands-on with, the problem is multiple businesses, multiple income streams. So parsing that out. And we all know that one of the biggest reasons people doubt or don't have faith in programs that are run through the government or with tax money is that the data that drives them is not accurate. And we don't want people to not be faithful to that or trust it. But so back to the original question that Heath had is, should we tie cost of production study participation to receiving and in being enrolled in the tier program? No, but perhaps the education that can be offered and be provided could be tied to it in the short run to make sure that everybody gets to the level where they need to be. And in a sneaky subconscious way, perhaps that is how one of the biggest challenges on our farms is that transition from one generation to the next. If one generation that makes decisions doesn't want to do that process, perhaps the younger generation will be voluntold to do it. And that is a benefit to everybody, whether you are the processor, the milk hauler, the eater, or the farmer, or the government official, that we are providing that opportunity and they are availing themselves of it. And I speak as someone that I believe I've been told multiple times that while I do worry, and I have called Gary because I was concerned about the data he received from our farm, the fact of the matter is the data from our farm, as Annie had pointed out, sometimes is, because it's easier and easier to tell where data comes from, our data usually is not utilized and filled in, is included. So we go through the trouble when it's our turn and no one uses it because we're an outlier, supposedly. So I get that. But on the other hand, just want to make sure everyone understands that I understand that the problems exist at every tier. But it's challenging and it needs to be addressed. And we aren't simply trying to solve the tier program here. I feel like this is about solving a lot of issues, and the tier program is a vehicle which to do it. So.
I will say I am quite confident. I know the least about the intricacies of dairy farm economics as anybody in this meeting. I do, but I am wondering if we know that or is there a way to understand, that, energy costs generally represent this amount of the business and feed costs are this, and therefore there may be some data points that we wouldn't need to rely on farmers in order to get because these are economic indicators that we might be able to get in another way that could give us some insight in what the cost of production is, or a guess at it.
Can I can speak to that just a little bit if you want. Not that I know of, Craig. Things are so individualized. Just real quick, the biggest expenses on a dairy farm would be labor and feed, and those are so incredibly dependent on family labor versus hired labor for the labor side, amongst all kinds of other things, efficiency factors, things like that. And then the second one is feed, and the biggest difference in feed, other than organic or conventional, would be how good your crops are and how much feed you can avoid buying because of the crops that you've been able to put up. So even if, for example, a program that's a little bit similar to the tier program in some ways is called the dairy margin coverage through FSA. That's based on a formula that they tried to create a formula like that. So they say, here's the milk price, here's what it should cost to feed a cow based on the cost of alfalfa and soy and corn and a few of the major inputs of grain. But it doesn't work great in the Northeast. For example, in 2023, it paid pretty well and everybody was very thankful for it. But because the grain costs went down a little bit, it didn't pay anything in 2024, very, very little to dairy farms. And we could still really use it. Part of the problem, the net cost of production stinks for the dairy farms in 2024 is, in my opinion, is other increases, other inflationary items, right, in fuel and different, not necessarily fuel anymore, but fertilizer and some of those kind of things, right? So that model doesn't work great. And I think that's what DMC tried to do, is make a formula like, okay, if this formula comes out bad, then it must be bad for everybody and we'll pay. And it doesn't work as well for farms in the Northeast as it does for farms in the Midwest and West that are buying a lot of alfalfa and feeding it, whereas we grow most of our forage in the Northeast.
But it maybe is a good idea to take a look at, between studies, right? Because it's once every 3 years on the farm. Is there an adjuster, or inflationary percentage you could add each year until you get to the next study, so that it's not completely outdated after it's done? We could take pieces of the CPI or whatever various indexes and maybe build that in.
I think we've talked a little bit, especially because Gary Anderson probably won't be doing the study again. Gary actually spent a lot of time talking with a bunch of us about how to move this forward and get better information, more clean, how are we going to be able to collect it in the future and have it count. And one of the things he talked about is either piggybacking on some existing programs, either through Farm Credit or through Cornell has a program where farmers routinely put in their information, and it's not just for cost of production purposes. They get other information back to help them with management and business decisions. But we could do either piggyback on one of those. We could create one of our own that people had to periodically put their info in, and then we could, maybe have some formulas that could run through. So it is possible. There's going to be a long creation process, and going to need to be some folks who are really sharp on a lot of these things to put it together, and so it'll stand up over time and be pulling the right numbers and the right reflections. It's also going to cost a significant amount. And sorry to be an issue, but the commission carries the cost of this cost of production studies. The tier program piggybacked off our rulemaking, but then in order to fulfill what the tier needs, it really changes the scope of what the Milk Commission used to get out of the cost of production. And we're expected to come up with that funding out of our existing budget. So, if we are talking a computer program or something like that, we've got a separate funding issue to do. But, it is we've got other examples of this, a more automated system that, that we could do and put in place. So it's, I mean, it's worth talking about.
Yeah, and just to give you a quick window on that, I do a couple of those programs with our clients, like Julie Marie said, that's mostly for their own management. And if I do the annual report card one that we call our benchmark, that's like $3,000 that the farm pays out of their own pocket to do. And if we do the dairy profit analyzer, which is much less of a report card, but more of a cash flow type thing, you know, that depending on the level that they want to do, it's $800 to $1,500. And I would do that, you know, 6 or 8 times a year, or maybe 2 or 3 times a year, depending, you know, how people want to do it. So Cornell's benchmark program is similar to the benchmark program I do. And I'm not sure, I know in New York, there's not much cost to that. There are a few people in Maine that participate in that as well. And there may be a little bit of cost for them if they're not within the purview, but I'm not sure, you know, if they're outside of New York. And I have no idea how that would work if to piggyback that on with them. I was trying to think if there was any other programs I knew of off the top of my head, but just to give an idea.
So Amanda, I think we've surfaced a lot of ideas, and I think before we ended, we wanted to prioritize and then figure out what happens next. Do you want to lead that? Do you want to say anything before we jump into that process?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, we've covered a lot of territory here today. And I don't know. I mean, I guess I would want to take the temperature of the group. Do we feel like we've taken this conversation as far as we can or want to as a subgroup? Or do we want to go away and you know, we'll pull the notes together and give some of the questions that have been raised some more thought and come back around for another meeting before we try to, you know, sew this up? Or is there somebody here that feels so clear that these are the 3 things we need to take back to the group, and, you know, all this other stuff we either can't figure out as part of this process, or, you know, there's nowhere to go? But I'm not sure. I'm just not sure where folks feel like they are, and it would be good to hear.
I mean, I feel like the only in stone thing we have out of this meeting is that we need to fully fund the tier. I don't know. I would like to say that I think it would be worth researching where we could get some funding to help with that. But I mean, I don't have that answer, and I don't know if anybody does.
And are you saying you don't know if you'd have that answer if we had another meeting?
Well, I guess the question I would have is there any research that could be done to get us to that point, I guess, if we had another meeting.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I mean, I think we could all try to give that a little bit more thought. That might be something that we come back to talk more about. And we can certainly, you know, Craig and Julie Marie and I and others in the department, we can put our heads together and see if we come up with something creative from the you know, from the department perspective. But it doesn't mean that's the only way to think about this.
Thanks for putting those in the chat, Ethan.
Yeah, so I put a couple of things in the chat. I did feel clear about a few things that we keep talking about over and over, including this one. And so a better economic impact study, better data on which to base the program, or data that we all feel better, more comfortable about, and can actively stand behind and say that it's got to be right. And then a tool for producers, or report emailed to producers. Julie Marie says she's fielding a bunch of calls. She says that she has the numbers together by the 15th of the month. Is there some kind of report we could just text out to everybody got their thing? Hey, your check's coming. This is what it's going to be. That might be helpful. I mean, I do try and figure out I do try and figure out for budgeting purposes on a monthly basis, and it's different if you say, well, the floor is got to be, tier 4 for the year, but that's different. That makes, if you're doing cash flow budgeting and trying to figure out which month is going to hurt the most, if it's May, June, or July, then you need to know more specific. But anyways, then still needed, or something that we haven't really come around on a good recommendation yet in my mind was, where does the funding come from to be fair or equitable, or however we want to put that, or where does more funding come from, maybe I should say. And then the last one was, do we increase funding to increase the dairy industry? I mean, are we past the point where we're just trying to minimize the dairy farm losses? Is this more like if you build a sports stadium in Maine, they're going to help you out tax wise or something? If you come to and run a dairy farm or buy one of our existing dairy farms in Maine and want to run it, do we want to promote that? Can we prove that dairy farming is so beneficial to our state that we try and encourage more people to come here and dairy farm? I think that would be interesting.
And I don't know if everybody sees Rebecca's question in the chat. Is it worth exploring handling fees on other classes of milk?
I know Julie Marie touched on it, but I mean, is it worth another swing of the bat? I don't know.
It's a tricky question.
It is.
And,
I mean, I'm a processor sitting here saying that. Yeah.
Right. No, but it really, it boils down to, at least in the last task force that looked at this, it boiled down to the mechanics of how do you collect it. And it wasn't a lack of logic. I mean, it kind of makes sense that milk is made into a lot of things. If we spread out a fee over a lot of things, then it has a less of an impact for the consumer. But it was the mechanics of how do you collect it and how do you make that assessment, and we're talking as opposed to fluid milk, which is a perishable product, so you have set time between it's made, it's bottled, and it's taken for the consumer. A lot of those other products go into storage, and so how does that impact the ability to do wholesale and other pricing? So
my fear, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
My fear is the continued downward slide of consumption in class 1. And so we're just going to continue to create a bigger gap, between the general fund and this handling fee, or this handling fee into the general fund. I apologize. And so, we all know that cheese is the category that continues to grow in consumption. And with the federal order reforms, Marie, I mean, I'm afraid class 1 is going to continue to slide and maybe faster. So, I mean, I'm just throwing an idea.
The one thing that I think is an insulator that's important to remember, the handling fee is and must be completely separate from the tier program. So, I mean, its policy, it was created about the same time as the tier program, but its policy directive really needs to be somewhat separate.
Okay.
And that's because there have been court decisions that say it's got to be.
So less money into the general fund. I mean, from class 1.
It's that the class 1, the direct class 1 is, we are a class 1 state and we have class 1 processing. And so that is how we were able to do the justification for putting on the fee in the first place. But, if our goal with the fee was to fully fund the tier program, then we would have a problem, because there's a lot of that milk. Well, right now, most of the milk, 100% of the milk being bottled in our in-state processing comes from Maine, but that could change. And if it did, and we only paid back to Maine producers, then we have a court challenge. So, there are a lot of things, and that's why we have to keep the tier very separate from that. And there was always a policy understanding that the handling fee was not going to totally cover the cost of the tier program. but it was a good faith effort and contribution from ultimately the consumers to supporting the farmers. But it does raise the question of, you know, when we're looking at funding, where do we want to look? And again, looking at additional handling fees on other products, or even altering the handling fee on class 1 milk has enough pitfalls that it would not, quite honestly, it's not where I think our go-to should be.
So I sort of hate the idea of this, and can imagine the headlines now, like a backlash, right? But what if we did sort of a tax on a dairy product, right? And I hate the idea of that, especially on like basic food items, right? I'm from New Hampshire. There's no sales tax there. Like, that's my general baseline. but even most places, there's not any tax on milk, bread, cheese, whatever, those basic kind of things. But I also pulled up the thing quickly on the consumption in Maine for 2023, right? So if we said, well, let's not tax fluid milk because that's got enough problems with consumption and we don't want to mess that up, and it's a basic food item, but we'll tax cheese instead. That's maybe not quite as baseline, whatever, but you go from 126 million pounds of milk to 25 million pounds of cheese. So to get the funding out of that, it would have to be a pretty large amount, right? I mean, I guess some of that cheese is worth more money than others, but.
And the majority of that cheese is coming from outside the state. And that's what makes the difference, because at least again, this is the logic that went into the handling fee on fluid milk. We have fluid processors in Maine. They are able to benefit from having a consistent local supply of milk and being able to count on that. Back when the handling fee was put into place, the Maine quality seal as a selling point on milk bottled in Maine was a big deal. You could take milk with that Maine quality seal and go into Boston and easily get an additional 20 cents just because it said Maine. And so because of that, there was a benefit to multiple layers of the dairy industry, you know, knowing that they'll have that consistent supply. Because we don't have any cheese producers, what's the delivery back to them? And then ultimately what ends up is I mean, we can probably anticipate a great amount of pushback. I'm not being a naysayer. I'm just trying to put it in political context and a little bit of historical context.
Yeah, right. No, that's what I'm trying to do too, is sort of be poking everybody to see how upset they get. But I mean, on the one hand, right, we can take cheese. If we did a tax on cheese, we could take tax money on dairy products that came from outside of Maine. But on the other hand, we take gambling money that comes from outside of Maine too, right? We're taking a percentage of, I mean, not totally and completely, but a large part of it. That's part of the reason that people don't care, because they're not the ones gambling. I mean, to an extent, right? I'm being facetious here, but.
Well, the other thing is, if you look at the history of sin taxes,
yeah,
going lottery, doesn't matter what it is, there's a long history of the income from that being relegated to programs totally unconnected with the gambling or liquor or whatever it might be. And so, again, if we're looking at where are the growth sectors, where are the sectors that are really pumping money into our state coffers right now, that's where it's coming from. Again, we'd have to have a pretty tight political strategy in order to defend, if we're opening up the cascade, but the door has already been a little bit opened because we already get money from Oxford.
So that would be a lot of people, especially farmers and dairy farmers, complain about solar taking farmland. Maybe we tax solar heavily and give it to the dairy farmers. I'm teasing. Please don't call my phone number.
A whole other
Yeah.
whole other topic.
From and I understand the need to be careful about not implying there's a connection between the handling fee and the tier. However, in the discussion, I mean, I do think some reminder wouldn't be harmful that exists. I mean, in the conversation about the tier, about the cost of production study in the committee room, I don't remember anybody mentioning that dairy was also creating this income stream.
And most of the reason for that is because of the court requirements, the money is collected and goes into the general fund. It is not, unlike the Oxford casino money, it's not dedicated.
Yeah.
So
understood, but I guess the point is that these folks who are getting a benefit, they're also creating a revenue stream, even if they're not linked.
Yeah, it's kind of been one of those things that, quite honestly, that's a hallway conversation, not in the committee room conversation. And that's just to keep it, to operate in the spirit as well as the letter of the law, that they are separate.
I just want, I think that there is this cautious, I would want to be cautious about having a so-called tax on cheese and all these other products, but I think that idea is probably the best idea we've had all day. I get that. I would really want to know, I guess, if we were going to, if there could be some research done on the legality behind that. Because we don't want to put a lot of work into something that we find out it's not going to be legal anyways. But I mean, I would love to tax the guy that's going to the horse track or the guy that's drinking a little too much, because that's always the other guy. But I mean, the person that's enjoying dairy products ought to belly up and pay a little bit if they enjoy dairy products. But I think it's a fine line. I don't want to disincentivize a processor or a marketer from looking at Maine, because they have to price their product a little higher. So I don't know, Rebecca, if you would have any insight on that. What would that point be? And is that a thought from your perspective that we would have to,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, we can take a look at it at a high level, right? Not spend a lot of time, but I mean, the other thought behind my comment was that maybe it's a whiteboard, right? And then maybe it would spur another idea from somebody else, just to throw ideas out, right? Like, no idea is a bad idea. Just, whether or not you act on it. But I mean, there are probably some interstate issues that we would need to look at, and just kind of, at a high level, and I can have some conversation with my team.
I think it would take, especially from the milk commission's perspective. I mean, we couldn't just, tax 40 different other products and tell Julie to make sure it's all priced right. I mean, that's a totally different deal. But I mean, the amount of revenue that would bring in, then we may have to have some more help at that to do that.
Keep in mind, I have nothing to do with the handling fee other than I report what the amount is going to be each month based on when we do the monthly pricing. That is 100% handled by Maine Revenue Services.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I was confusing that with like the
Yeah.
minimum milk price is what I was thinking. Yeah.
So I think that's the thing. It's like, if we're talking about handling fees or taxes or anything like that, they can't necessarily come back to the tier program. They would have to go to the general fund. But I guess also I would just say I'd be really careful about going down that road, because I think there are other product categories that have much higher margins than anything made with dairy. And I also would caution not wanting to have any kind of negative impact on our in-state cheese producers who are trying real hard to grow their businesses and be part of the solution. And there are a few different things, a few different flags for me on that. It just might not be as straightforward as it seems on, at face value.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I mean, I used to make maple syrup, right? And I used to sell it on Maple Sunday. And one of the things that was really simple was that there wasn't tax on maple syrup, right? So it's a lot easier to be a small maple producer and sell some maple syrup and not have to do all that math and figure all that part out. And I'm sure it's similar for cheese producers and people who are selling some raw milk and things like that. I'm presuming they're reporting all their sales, but they don't have to worry about the tax portion of it, as far as that goes, which can be a burden for a small person starting out. But I thought that Heath hit it on the head too when he asked Rebecca about that, because I was thinking that too. The current handling fee and whatnot is like, oh, I wonder how much of a detriment that is to them building a plant in Maine. But maybe Maine's not on their radar to build a big new plant anyways, because we're at the end of the world. It's not that big a deal. And I was thinking that a tax, like I mentioned, would be better for them. But if they're marketing, it's not really any different, right? They're going to have to figure that into like, okay, do we really want to build a plant where we're going to have to charge more for that? And it's going to be harder to market it anyways. And so that's probably for their discussion and processing breakout group, right? Is to figure out how to encourage more processing so that we don't do something or think about something in this group that's going to hamper that group as far as putting all this stuff together at the end.
Yeah, you start pulling the thread. Everything's connected, right?
So I'm just going to repeat a couple of things that have been said. Fully funding the short run break even, fully funding the tier. Part of, to get there, to build the case for that is an economic impact study as one tool to make the case with legislators, to make the case with consumers. The cost of production is a subset of that. So we had a big discussion about the quality of data in the cost of production study. What can we do to say, to ensure the quality of that data, but also are there any things that can take the burden of gathering that data off the farms or the farmers, or somehow systematize that, because that's a challenge that we're asking people who don't necessarily have the time or the systems to provide the data. And then this robust conversation about whether we're talking about funding the tier program directly or just enhancing the benefit, the economic benefit of dairy to Maine's coffers that somehow would make the case for the tier more palatable. We've had a lot of ideas, some related to dairy, some not. And then this concept about, exploring handling fees on classes other than class 1 is one of those ideas, but some of these were dairy specific and some were, what are the other, opening up the cascades or looking at other streams. When you hear that, I'm sorry. And then, right, on the data collection point, I'm looking at Ethan's note that, can we somehow piggyback onto other ongoing data collection that's happening, or build a tool that does that so it isn't so onerous. So when you hear that, again, I think we come back to the question, what do we need? Is there something that we need to know more about? Do we need to continue this conversation? Or is that as far as we can take it? Are there things that we need to know more about? You need to know more about to have a better or a different or another installation of this, another installment of this conversation.
Or maybe we just need to get the notes out, digest, and come back with any other ideas that sort of percolate.
I just feel like I've heard this before, and Heath may laugh and know exactly who I'm talking about, kind of thing. But like, I've heard this before. I just want dairy farmers to be profitable without the tier. You know, like I don't want the dairy farmers to have to farm the government, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I think the tier program is great. I just mean like I think almost everybody would be happy if they didn't ever get another tier check again, because that meant that the milk price was so high that they were fine. You know, and we just need to figure out a way to help them be more profitable, or a fair way for everybody to be more profitable in Maine. And I don't know what that is. You know, we can all see it like, okay, this person is doing fine and maybe doesn't need as much tier money as that person who just can't. And it's not that they're bad farmers. It's just that nothing ever seems to go just right, or, you know, whatever. There's all kinds of stories like that. And I don't know what the best way to make sure everybody gets what they need and not a ton more, you know.
I think didn't you raise your hand for the other two subgroup discussions too? Because I think that's where we're gonna take bites at that apple, you know. But yeah, I mean, no farmer wants to have to rely on the tier program. I know I've heard, you know, farmers say that over and over again, but the reality is they're not getting paid enough to cover the cost of, at times, to cover the cost of production. And that is, you know, there are a lot of factors that play into that are out of a lot of people's control. So this program does play a really important role in the whole dairy sort of ecosystem.
So don't scream at me. This is my naivete, maybe, with taxes and government and whatnot. But say for example, we doubled what the tier program is today for everybody, and then also made a state of Maine tax that somehow or another made you on your Maine state tax return pay back if you happen to have what do they call them, windfall profits. So if you're a dairy farmer and had windfall profits and a whole bunch of it was from the tier program, maybe you have to pay back a certain percentage of it or something silly. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, like sort of sending out all kinds of extra money and then asking for it back if you made too much, but just to think outside of the box a little bit. I don't know.
I could never make too much. We would spend it all. But in all seriousness, dairy farmers would spend it all. I mean, we're so far from, you know, we all have 10 tractors that are like 40 years old. And if they were all brand new, it would cost $500 million to buy all these tractors brand new. So, I mean, where do you end? Where does it end? You know?
No, I'm right there with you, but that's fine, right? If the state of Maine this year gives Miller Dairy Farm $10 million, right, and you spend it all in the economy of Maine, upgrading and making your business better, and it all comes back to Maine, so be it. That's fine. I'm fine with that, right? If we make some other kind of windfall tax, it's like, oh, the state of Maine sent him $10 million and he put 9.9 million of it in a offshore's account. Well, then we want some of it back, you know, like, you know what I mean? And we could, again, this could be a crazy rabbit hole. It's probably not ever any kind of possibility, but you know, then you wouldn't be profitable. If you spend it all on your business, on legitimate business expenses, then it all goes right back into the economy, and that's fine with me. But
yeah.
I agree with Amanda that this underlying, you know, how do we get to the underlying economics of dairy in particular? I got to say, it's a question across all of agriculture. That really is the $1 million question. But until that's answered, I think we know that the tier is going to be necessary. So I'll say this: I realize we don't know if we need another meeting, but I'm a little reluctant to let people go without at least penciling in a date. Unless, did we do that? We didn't do that at the plenary, did we? Did we just book this?
Yep, we picked the first date and figured that we'd figure it out on this call.
So would people be open to holding some time, realizing that we may not use it, and we'll make that call once the notes go out and maybe decide that over email?
Mm-hmm.
When is our next full group meeting is not until October, right?
Right. It's
Correct.
October. See if I can find it. Oh, I think it is on the 7th. Might be October 7th. So we've got some time.
Do people want to look at the week of September 16th? Oh. Julie Marie is saying no, she does not want to look at the week of September 16th.
I'd rather look at the next week, but I'm always thinking that I'm going to be caught up the further out I go.
Okay, the week of the 23rd would put us 2 weeks before the plenary, so we'd have a little bit of time to gather thoughts. So, and for the farmers, middle of the day is better. Yep. Knowing there's not a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what does Friday the 27th look like for folks?
I'm good with that.
I'm just saying,
as well.
I'm throwing that out there because I'm actually traveling the Monday through Thursday, so that would make my life a little easier to be like back in one place.
So do people want to hold 1 to 3 that day?
Holding it right now.
So 1 to 3 on Friday the 27th. Hold for a possible tiers working group. In the meantime, early next week, I'll try to get the notes out, and then we can have a conversation about whether, what work does the group want to give, back to me and staff, so that we can have the meeting you want to have on Friday the 27th. Or do we know everything we need to know? All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Oh, did you lose my audio? I see, but I was speechless for a moment, or I just had a long pause.
No.
That was after my tax and windfall credit.
Gotcha.
I just wanted to say I've got the report, or I have a draft copy. That's all I can find. And the legislation regarding that study group that looked into handling fees on other products. It's very, very short. And I'll try to put it in an email and send it to everybody so you can at least take a look at, what's in the historical archive. Like I said, I don't have a final report anywhere, but I have a draft copy that I inherited.
So we should make sure that gets posted under this meeting on the website. So we'll make note of that.
Yep.
So we'll make sure the public has access to everything that we do.
I'll put Miriam and Jody on the email notification list.
Actually, if you could put Courtney on, she can pop it right up.
Yep. Perfect.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, so much. I wish we had easy answers. I keep saying this. I wish I had a money printing press in the basement of our building, make all our lives a lot easier. But I think we're gonna come out the other side of this, I think, with some strong recommendations. I have no doubt. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.